We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph in Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 57a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing the fact that it's prohibited to derive benefit from the ore, from the hide of the shor haniskel. And the Gemara said some Tanoim learned that out from the pasuk which says Ubal Hashor Naki. Others use Ubal Hashor Naki for something else, and they learn it out from the pasuk which says Es Besaro, the extra word Es. We learn out Es HaTafel LeBesaro, that the ore, the hide, is also, it's prohibited to derive benefit from the hide. And so the Gemara now asks, according to those who learn it from Ubal Hashor Naki, what do they do with the S? And the Gemara explains Es Lo Darish, that Tana just doesn't darshan the extra word S, as Rashi says, Es Lo Darish L'Ribuya. We don't darshan the word S to learn out any inclusions. Kedetanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Shimon Ha'amsoni, V'amri Lo Nechemyu Ha'amsoni, Hayadorish Kol Esen Shebetorah. Shimon Ha'amsoni, and some say it was Nechemyu Ha'amsoni, he would darshan all of the Esen in the Torah. Kevan Shehigia L'Es Hashem Elokechatira, but when he got to the word S, in the pasuk of Es Hashem Elokechatira, Piresh, he separated, he couldn't find anything that he could include. Amrulo Talmidav, so his student said to him, Rebbe, Kol Esen Shedarashta, Rebbe, all of the word S's that you darshan, Matei Aleim, what will be with those drushes? Amar Lemi said to them, Kashem Shekibalti Schar Ladrisha, just like I received the reward for darshaning, Kach Kibalti Al HaPrisha, so too I receive reward for separating from the drasha, for retracting my previous drasha. At Shabor Rabbi Akiva v'limed Es Hashem Elokechatira, until Rabbi Akiva came and he taught Es Hashem Elokechatira. What does the word Es include? L'rabos Talmidei Chachamim. It comes to include Talmidei Chachamim. And Rashi explains, Piresh, he separated why Sheyori l'rabos shum davar lahashvoso l'mora hamakom, because the meaning of the pasuk is you have to fear God. So what could we include? What can we equate to the fear of God? That's why he separated. He didn't want to darshan that word Es. But then Rabbi Akiva came along and he taught that the S comes to include the fear of Talmidei Chachamim. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Be'eglo arufa, if somebody is mekadesh, a woman with the eglo arufa, that's the calf, that the neck is broken when you have a situation of a dead body that's found outside of a city. And so that also, it's prohibited to get benefit from the eglo arufa, and therefore if you're mekadesh, a woman with eglo arufa, it's not going to be a good kiddushin. And the Gemara says, Menolan, from where do we know this? Amri devei Rabbi Yanai, they say in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yanai, Kapora ksiv bo kekotchim. It says the word kapora by egla arufa. It says it's an atonement. That means it's compared to kotchim. It's like karbonos, just like kotchim are asur bahana. So too when it comes to the egla arufa, it is asur bahana. And Rashi says, Kapara ksiv bo kaper li'amcha Yisrael. It says in the pasuk by egla arufa, kaper li'amcha Yisrael. It should be an atonement for your nation Israel. Kekotchim, it's like kotchim. V'kotchim asurin bahana. When it comes to kotchim, it's asur to get benefit from kotchim. Sharei mo'alin behen. There's a din of me'ila over there. And so therefore, when it comes to egla arufa as well, there's a prohibition to derive benefit. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Tzipori Mitzorah, if a man is Mekadesh, a woman with the birds of the Mitzorah, that also it's prohibited to get benefit, and therefore it's not a good Kiddushin. And the Gemara says, Menolan, from where do we know that it's prohibited to get benefit from the Tzipori Mitzorah? The Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel, because it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Shmuel, Nemar Machshir u'Mechaper mibefnim. It says Machshir and Mechaper when it comes to things that happen inside the Beis HaMikdash. V'Nemar Machshir Mechaper mibachutz, and it also talks about Machshir and Mechaper when it comes to things that happen outside of the Beis HaMikdash. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Ma Machshir and Mechaper ha'amar befnim, just like the Machshir and the Mechaper that are spoken about in the Beis HaMikdash. Asabo Machshir k'Mechaper. The Machshir is the same as the Mechaper. It's asur to get benefit. It's asur b'hana. Af Machshir Mechaper ha'amar b'chutz. So to the Machshir and the Mechaper that are spoken about outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Asabo Machshir k'Mechaper. The Machshir is considered like the Mechaper, and again, it's asur to derive benefit. And Rashi explains, Tzipore Mitzorah, the birds of the Mitzorah, Machshire Bachutzein, those are considered Machshire Bachutz. Why? Sharei Chutz Lo'ir Nasis Mitzvasim. First of all, the mitzvah is done outside of the city, outside of Yerushalayim, so that's why it's considered Chutz. It's also, it's not considered an atonement. Those birds are in order to allow the Mitzorah to enter into the camp. That's why it's called a Machshir. That's a Machshir Mibachutz. And then we also have a Machshir Bifnim. We also have a Machshir on the inside, meaning to say, the Asham Mitzorah, the carbon Asham that the Mitzorah actually brings, that's a Machshir that's inside the Beis HaMikdash. And then we have Mechaper Bifnim. We have things that are Kapara inside the Beis HaMikdash. That's Kol HaKarbonos. All Karbonos in general are considered to be Mechaper inside inside the Beis HaMikdash, and mechaper b'chutz, we also have a mechaper that applies outside the Beis HaMikdash. That's egla arufa. Egla arufa, as we said above, is considered a kapara. That's something that's a mechaper, but it's outside the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore we compare all of these elements. Ma bifnim asa machshir kemechaper. Just like when it comes to bifnim, the machshir and the mechaper are the same, meaning to say, lo chilek bein asham mitzora l'shara shamas. We don't make a distinction between the asham that a mitzora brings and other carbon asham. We say by all of them, it's considered that they're asr b'hana. So the same thing is going to be true when it comes to mibachutz. Things that are done mibachutz, we make the machshir k'mechaper, just like the mechaper egla arufa is asr b'hana. So too the machshir, meaning the tzipori mitzora. That's what we're trying to learn out over here. So too the tzipori mitzora, which is the machshir mibachutz, that's also going to be asr b'hana. Just like the machshir is the same as the mechaper bifnim, so too the machshir is the same as the mechaper mibachutz. And the Gemara continues, Itzmar, we have the following machlokas amoroim, tzipori mitzora, when it comes to the birds of a mitzora, me'emasai asurim, from what point in time are they asr b'hana? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mishas Shchita. Rabbi Yochanan says from the time of the Shchita. Reish Lakish Amar Mishas Lakichan. Reish Lakish says from the time that they are taken. And the Gemara explains, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mishas Shchita. Rabbi Yochanan says from the time of the Shchita. Shchita hu da asrla. It's the Shchita that creates the prohibition. Reish Lakish Amar Mishas Lakichan. Reish Lakish says from the time that it's taken. We learned that out. Me egla arufa. We learned that out from egla arufa. Me egla arufa nafka. That's learned out from egla arufa. Ma egla arufa mechayim. Just like by egla arufa, the prohibition takes place while the animal is still alive. So too, when it comes to the birds of the mitzora, the prohibition to derive benefit applies already from the time that the animal is still alive. And Rashi explains Mishas Shchita, again, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, it's from the time of the Shchita that the Tzipore Mitzora are Aser. Mishas Shchita Ne'eseres HaShchuta. Now Rashi explains there are two birds over here. One of them is shechted, that one is prohibited from the time of the Shchita. V'hameshulachas, the bird that's going to be sent away, Muteres, that is Mutter Kidulakamon, that will be explained later on. And the other opinion, the opinion of Reish Lakish, is Mishas Lakicha, from the moment that the birds are taken, Nesaros Shtei, and they're actually both prohibited, Ad Sheyishlach HaMeshulachas, until you send away the one that's being sent away, V'niteres B'shiluch, and that one, when it is sent away, at that moment it becomes mutter. Me egla arufa, and again we learn out according to Reish Lakish from egla arufa, just like egla arufa, the prohibition is while it's alive. Mahasam mitzra mechayim kekachim, just like over there, it's also while it's alive like kachim. Afkan mechayim soto, over here by the tzipori mitzora, the isra is going to be while the birds are alive. And the Gemara continues, V'egla arufa gufa, when it comes to egla arufa itself, may emasai, from when exactly, we know that the prohibition is when it's alive, but from when exactly does it become prohibited? Amar Rabbi Yanai says, Gvul shamati, but I did hear a boundary in this case. I heard, in other words, a moment in time when it's asur v'shachachti, but I forgot when it is. V'nasvin chavraya lomar, but the colleagues, they say as follows, Yiri dosel nachal esam, when it goes down to the valley, to the hard valley, at that point in time, hi osarta, that's what creates the prohibition, that's when it's prohibited. And so the Gemara says, well, if you're learning from egla arufa, ima egla arufa, if when it comes to egla arufa, mishas lakicha lo mitzvah, it turns out that it's not asr from the time that it's taken, it's only asr from the time that it goes down to the nachal esan. So after tzipori mitzora nami, mishas lakicha lo mitzvah. So when it comes to the birds of the mitzora also, they shouldn't be asr from the time they're taken. And the Gemara says, Hachi Ashta, what kind of comparison are you making between egla arufa and tzipori mitzora? Hasam over there, when it comes to egla arufa, islay gavul achrina, there's another boundary, there's another time, namely the time that is brought down to the Nachal Esan, that we can say that the prohibition begins. But Hach over here, when it comes to the birds, there's nothing that really happens. Mi islay gvul achrina, is there another gvul, is there another boundary, and therefore the prohibition is going to be from the time it's taken, because there is no other moment in time where the prohibition can take effect. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan l'Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan asked Reish Lakish the following question from a Braisa. The Braisa says, the Pasuk says, called Sipor Tahora Tochelu. It says, any bird that is tar, any kosher bird, you're allowed to eat. And we learn from that Pasuk, L'Rabo says HaMashulachas, that comes to include the bird that is sent away. Again, there are two birds by the Mitzora. The one that is sent away is also going to be mutter to eat. V'zeh asher lo tochlu, and then the Pasuk goes on to say that the following birds you're not allowed to eat. Asher lo tochlu mehem l'rabo says hashchuta. That Pasuk comes to include the animal that's shechted, the bird of the Mitzora that's shechted. That one is prohibited. And so Rabbi Yochanan now asks Reish Lakish from this brisa, Visalka daitach mechayim asura. Now, if you're correct that the prohibition when it comes to the birds of the Metzora, that prohibition starts when the birds are alive, and then at the moment of shechita, so the animal that's shechted, that remains aser, and the one that's sent away is mutter. So la'achar shechita miboy, so la'achar shechita, what do we need to say? That after you shech the animal, it's prohibited. There was already a prohibition from the time that it was alive. You don't need to tell us. The pasuk doesn't need to say l'rabos that we need to include. L'rabos is ashchuta. You don't need that pasuk. And the Gemara says on behalf of Reish Lakish, Ma'u d'tema, what might you have said? Midi dehave akodshim, that maybe it's similar to kodshim, to karbonos, to mechayim asiri, because when it comes to kodshim, while the animal is alive, there's a prohibition. V'yasya shchito machsharlu, and then the shchita comes along and actually makes it kosher. So you might have actually thought when it comes to the birds of the Metzora that it's prohibited when it's alive, and then after shchita maybe you would say it is mutter. And so that's why kamash malon, that's why the pasuk is coming to teach us that even after shchita, that bird that was shechted, it remains prohibited. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei, we have a question. This is from a Mishnah in the Goyim. Shachata v'nimtzas treifa. The Mishnah over here is talking about a case where you shech the animal. Again, this is talking about the birds of the Metzora. You shech the bird of the Metzora, and then it turns out that that particular bird is a treifa. So the halacha is yikach zug l'shniya. So you have to take a pair for that second bird. You have to get a new bird to replace the one that was a treifa. V'harishona muteres b'hana. And that first bird, the one that you shechted, that turns out it was a treifa, so it's mutter to get hana from that bird. And so the Gemara now says, Visalka daitach mechayim asura. This is Rabbi Yochanan again asking on Reish Lakish, if you think that really the animals are already prohibited from the time they're alive, so harishona my muteres ba'ana. So therefore, when you go ahead and you shecht the bird, and it turns out that it's a treifa, why is it muter b'hana in such a situation? There already was a prohibition. The fact that it developed and it turned into a treifa, that shouldn't take away the prohibition that existed from when it was alive. And the Gemara answers on behalf of Reish Lakish. Amarle said to him, Hacha b'mayaskin, and here what are we talking about? Kegon shenimtzas treifa bivnei meyeha, that the treifas, the actual wound within the animal, the mortal wound, is within, it's inside the animal. It was a treifa all along. It's not something that developed later, and so therefore, de lo chalala kedusha klal. It turned out there was never any kedusha on this animal from the outset, and that's why the Mishnah is saying that it's muteres b'hana. There was never any prohibition from the beginning. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei, we have a question from a Bryce, and this is from the Tosefta. Shachata shalo be'ezo, v'shalo be'etz erez, v'shalo b'shni tolas. Let's say he shechs the animal again. This is talking about the bird of the Metzora, but he doesn't have the ezov, he doesn't have the hyssop, or he doesn't have the etz erez, the cedar wood, or he doesn't have the shni tolas, he doesn't have the scarlet thread. Rabbi Yaakov says, Hoel v'huktzah l'mitzvasa, since it was set aside for the purpose of this mitzvah, asura, it is prohibited. Rabbi Shimon says, since it was shechted but not according to the proper instructions, you didn't have everything that you needed, muteres, so therefore in this case it's muteres, the shechit of the animal is not going to create any prohibition. And so again the Gemara asks on Reish Lakish, Adkan lo pligi, over here you only have a machlokas tanoim, the only machlokas is elamar savar shechita she'enu ru'uya shma shechita, that one holds that a shechita that's really not fit because you don't have all the proper items, so that's considered to be a shechita and it still creates a prohibition. Umar savar, and the other one holds shechita she'enu ru'uya lo shma shechita, that if you have a shechita that is not fit, so it's not considered a shechita and it does not create the prohibition, but the kuli alma miya mechayim lo mitzvah, but everybody seems to agree that it's not prohibited from when it's alive, the prohibition is created by the shechita. That seems to be clear from both Tanoim over here. And the Gemara answers, Tanoi, you have to say according to Reish Lakish that it's a machlokas Tanoim. It is true that this Tosefta supports Rabbi Yochanan, but we do have a Tana that supports Reish Lakish. And Rashi explains, Tanoi, it's a machlokas Tanoim, Hani Tanoi svir lo kedeka'amr. In other words, these Tanoim do hold, like you're saying, that the shechita is what creates the prohibition, the lo mitzvah, that it's not usher from when the animal is alive, it's not usher yet. V'tana devei Rabbi Yishmael, the yolef machshami mechaper, but there is a Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael, which we're about to bring, that learns out machshir from mechaper, as we mentioned above as well, svir le, the mitzvah mechayim kemechaper, so that shita, the Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael holds, just like the mechaper, just like the atonement is also from when it's alive, like a carbon, so too when it comes to the machshir, we're talking about the birds of the Mitzorah, so too by the birds of the Mitzorah, the prohibition is going to be from when it is alive, according to Reish Lakish. And the Gemara brings the Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael. The Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, it was taught in the Yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, Nemar machshir o mechaber mi bifnim. It talks about the machshir and the mechaber mi bifnim. Again, this is what we mentioned above. The mechaber mi bifnim is referring to the carbon asham of the Mitzorah, that's bifnim, and then you have the machshir as well, that's mi bifnim. And Rashi explains, mechayim lo mitzvah, both Tanoim and the Tosefta agree that the prohibition does not occur while the animal is alive, the Isser of my Paki Isser, because if there was already an Isser from while it is alive, so why should the Isser go away just because you did the Shechita without all of the proper items? That wouldn't take away the Isser. So again, clearly in this Tosefta, both Tanoim agree that it's the Shechita that creates the Isser. The question just is, when it's a Shechita She'ena Ru'uya, does that create the prohibition or not? And then the Gemara answered Tanoihi. The Gemara answered, you'll say according to Reish Lakish, it's true that Tanoim in this Tosefta go against Reish Lakish, but there is a Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael which says the prohibition is from when the bird is alive. Hani Tanoi Svir Lo Kedekamer. Again, these Tanoim hold, like you said, the Lo Mitzvah, there's no prohibition from when it's alive. The Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, but the Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, which we're about to quote, the Yolef Machshir mi Mechaper, that learns out Machshir from Mechaper, Svir Le de Mitzvah Mechayim ke Mechaper, holds it just like a Mechaper. There's a prohibition just like by Kachim, by a carbon. The prohibition is from when the animal is alive. So too over here, when it comes to the birds of the Mitzorah, the prohibition takes place from the time that they are alive. And the Gemara brings the Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael. The Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, it was taught in the Yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, Nemar Machshir Mechaber mi Bifnim. It says Machshir and Mechaber mi Bifnim. V'nemar Machshir Mechaber mi Bachutz. And it also talks about the Machshir and the Mechaber Bachutz, the ones that are outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Ma Machshir or Mechaber Ha'amur Bifnim. Just like by the Machshir and the Mechaber that are in the Beis HaMikdash, what that means again, the Mechaber in the Beis HaMikdash is any karbonos. The Machshir in the Beis HaMikdash is the Asham of a Mitzorah. And so there the halacha is also Machshir Mechaper, that the Machshir follows the same rules as the Mechaper. Af Machshir Mechaper Homer Bachutz, so to the Machshir and the Mechaper that are Bachutz. Again, the Mechaper Bachutz is the Egla Arufa, and the Machshir Bachutz refers to the birds of the Mitzorah. Also, Machshir Mechaper, the halach is that the Machshir is the same as the Mechaper, and again, it's from there that you learn, just like the Mechaper, the prohibition is Mechayim, so too over here by the birds of the Mitzorah, the prohibition is Mechayim. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we said above, called Sipor Tahora Tochelu. Again, it says in the Pasuk that all the kosher birds you can eat, L'Rabos HaSamashulachas, that comes to include the bird that is sent away of the Mitzorah, that is no longer prohibited once it's sent away. V'zeh Asher Lo Tochlu Mehem, and then it says these are the birds that you don't eat. L'Rabos HaSashchuta, that comes to include the bird of the Mitzorah that's shechted, that bird is going to be prohibited. That's included in Asher Lo Tochlu. And the Gemara says, Ve'epachana, but the Gemara says, well, maybe we should reverse it. Who says that we should say that the Mishulachas is the one that's mutter, and then it's the Shchuta that's the one that's prohibited? And the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Lo matzinu ba'alei chayim shasrum. We don't find that living animals are prohibited, and so therefore it makes sense that the bird that remains alive, the Mishulachas, should be permitted. And Rashi says, Ve'epachano, let's reverse it. Maybe the one that shouldn't be eaten is the Mishulachas, the one that is sent away. And the answer was, Lo matzino ba'alei chayim shasur in Israel. We don't find that living animals, they have this prohibition forever. And the Gemara continues, is that really true? Maskefla Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak asks, V'lo, is that not really true? Do we not find living animals that are prohibited? Harei, what about the following example? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Zayin Amud Beis.